The first voting in key states begins in just 21 days, and the first Harris-Trump debate is actually scheduled for 15 days from now. So tonight we will be looking down the road to these big campaign events. We also have Professor Michael Eric Dyson and Jelani Cobb coming up this hour. The Democrats' new musical star, DJ Cassidy, will also join us by the end of the hour. So I invite you to get comfortable. We have a lot cooking for you. Right now we begin with new signs that Kamala Harris is gaining momentum from the DNC. All the speeches delivered, all the balloons dropped, all the points made and hammered home again. And the political question then becomes this week how this convention is or is not shaping the race. Well, we know more about that as we begin the week. Trump's convention, of course, was his first speech since narrowly avoiding that horrific assassination. There was huge interest going into the RNC, and it did draw an audience, but the DNC, we can now tell you, narrowly beat the RNC in the total traditional TV audience, with 28 million plus viewers watching Harris's finale speech. That is high. That is big interest. And that means that while you may follow the news or listen to Harris pretty regularly, we now know, and we can tell you this today as a fact, more people heard her last week than any time since October 2020. That's the last time she had that large a live TV audience, and it was during the debate with Mike Pence. There are also signs that Harris and the convention's key points reached tens of millions more people through streaming and social media. I've mentioned this to you before. If we are going to understand our world as it changes, we need to track how it's changing. And so linear TV, as they call it, still matters. Newspapers still matter. Traditional interviews still matter. I'm not telling you it's all been replaced, but a whole lot of people and younger voters tend to get their information elsewhere. And Democrats, as you see on the screen, may be opening up an edge on Republicans here with 21 million plus separate views in online streams. So if you take it all together, you're talking about tens and tens of millions of people who saw some of the DNC, which means what happened in Chicago may not stay in Chicago. It may be shaping the national race. In other words, here is what people are still talking about.
Our best days are not behind us, they're before us.
This convention has always been pretty good to kids with funny names who believe in a country where anything is possible.
Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
Let's all choose Kamala Harris.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
This convention stands a good chance to be on that very small list of significant moments in modern American history.
That whole convention, just amazing.
Democratic officials, delegates, the activists, all clearly enthused. And as you heard there, some historians, other independent observers have noted that whatever your politics, this was an effective and energetic program. It showcased as well governors making a clear case against Trump.
Hear me on this. It sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he gets to pick the winner. That's not freedom.
Take it from an actual billionaire. Trump is rich in only one thing: stupidity.
Like women across America, we just GSD. Get stuff done.
So that's some of what was said, what you may have heard if you followed it. Political conventions, though, are also stories. And that means, like any big or good story, it matters how they end. Now, the RNC began effectively. High stakes, as I mentioned, over the return of Donald Trump after the horrific shooting. Apparent unity for him in that crowd, which was a contrast to the Republicans' very divided 2016 convention. But the RNC ended poorly, with Trump giving a long speech that even Fox News viewers turned off as it stretched past 90 minutes. We have the data. Even Republican operatives conceded that was an unforced error. And so what started big ended at least mediocre. This DNC, however, ended with a political climax. Harris landing her speech, the DNC drawing the most viewers that night, as I mentioned, and a massive show of support continuing, pouring out from party activists. Harris has now raised $82 million during the DNC week alone. Her total haul now over $500 million in 1 month. Harris has also used these campaign events and last week as a kind of proof of concept. Remember, we all were there 5-6 weeks ago when Democratic candidates, especially in tough districts, were fleeing Joe Biden as a campaign figure. Now they want in on this campaign. They're excited about it, Axios reports, noting an army of House surrogates that are emerging. Democrats are going on offense this week in Georgia. That's the kind of state they would like to win, but would not need to win for Harris to take the Electoral College if they hold the blue wall. An effective convention also dominates the larger conversation. Many think that's happening as Trump has remained visibly on defense for days. His own former aides note that he's phoning it in. That's their term, that he's become low energy and undisciplined. It feels as if he's lost his mojo, said the Trump White House vet. Now, mojo, as Austin Powers will tell you, or momentum in political terms, is infamously difficult to measure. By the way, as we showed you in some of those highlights, Democrats still insist that they're either down a bit or at best tied. But campaigning is also certainly about inviting everyone in, and that means sharing who you are, who you want to be, and making room for people, for having fun. It can even help to be cool. Sure, it certainly doesn't hurt. And the convention also showed that.
Turn out for what? In the words of the great Steph Curry, we can tell Donald Trump, night, night.
Go vote. Be active. Let's show out in November like never before.
I guess Donald Trump will finally know what it's like when you get left for a younger woman.
First you say comma like a comma in a sentence. Then you say la like la 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 la.
Put it together and it's 1, 2, 3, Kamala.
Those are just some of the moments that you might recall. Many of them landed because they were real. They were planned for an audience and a purpose, of course, but kind of like a wedding toast, people can tell if someone prepared it and then shared something authentic or did something else. Now, you may have heard people say sometimes, okay, well, this isn't a popularity contest, which is actually funny because it sort of is. I mean, Donald Trump famously took the Electoral College in 2016 by doing something that you could imagine working in a certain kind of high school type popularity contest. He was a vulgar bully. People knew that. It was seen and exposed. But he was a bully who convinced enough people that he sort of represented something, that his type of defiance and rule breaking might be good for them, good for the country, bad for the swamp. It was an us and them thing. And yes, I'm simplifying. But it was a bully who could win a type of popularity contest once. Since then, the voters have not rushed back to the MAGA Republican Party. Not in 2018, not in 2020 when they booted Trump, and not in 2022 when the Biden-Harris administration beat long-standing trends that run against incumbents. This Harris convention appears to have legs, as they say, momentum, mojo, appears to be lasting precisely because it fits into that larger debate without what had become the gravitational political pull of Joe Biden, a man who had maybe met his moment, but also outlasted his moment, which is not necessarily a bad thing for him as a person, but is a thing that the country was processing. The Harris Convention offering a different type of path to popularity, to even a type of populism that is, yes, proudly progressive, not apologetic, that is about freedom, that is about inclusion, and it was also, believe it or not, about having a good time. And we are joined by Jelani Cobb from The New Yorker and Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia and Chief Creative and Content Officer for the Daily Beast and longtime international journalist Joanna Coles. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Popularity contest or not, was that a party people want to join? Does it matter in the weeks ahead, or does it just sort of fade away, the convention?
No, I mean, I think there are a few things that are at play here. One is, a very kind of subtle strategic thing that they did very early on, which is that everyone has been saying, that Donald Trump poses a serious threat, and so on people on the Democratic side of things, and they've been talking about him in these, stern, grave voices. And Kamala said he's an unserious person. Represents a serious threat, but he's an unserious person, and has proceeded to campaign with the kind of effusive joy and happiness, the kind of happy warrior. The people who, follow boxing, know, you'd always see like the guy who's getting in the ring who looks furious and like angry and just he wants to tear someone apart. And that's not the guy you worry about. You worry about the person who gets in the ring happy, the person who's like, I finally get to do the thing that I'm good at. And so what really, I think, will dictate this is the tone, if she carries that tone into the debates with him, which I could see, that being a kind of microcosm of the awkwardness, the kind of flustered quality that he's had ever since she entered the race.
Am I the only person that found the DNC 2 days too long? We covered it in myopic detail at the Daily Beast. We really did. But by the fourth night...
Everything in American politics is too long.
I know, it's too long. In Europe, we would have gone through 4 cycles of elections by now, just since the DNC. I just found it far too long. And really, when they're bringing out every B celebrity... And you're like, either it's Beyonce or bust. I just needed the Obamas, maybe a little bit of Oprah, always a good thing. And then, obviously, her speech, and Tim Walz and Gus. Gus Waltz, what a star. The internet was on fire for him. He was extraordinary. So I do think we've been introduced to a new array of characters, which feels very exciting. I think people are very bored, and we're clearly very bored at the prospect of Biden and Trump, the rematch. And now we have an entirely new set of characters, which I'm very excited about. But I think in 4 years' time, I would advise the Democrats to shrink it by 50%.
So one of the things that has become pretty clear when it comes to the Trump-Vance ticket is they know they have a big problem with women, voters, and the issue of abortion rights. And they are pretty freaked out about it, clearly, because just consider what Trump did the morning after Harris delivered her DNC address. He jumped onto Truth Social to boldly, I mean boldly not in a good way, and falsely claim that, quote, my administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. Yes. This from the guy who constantly brags about killing Roe v. Wade. And then yesterday, in an interview with Meet the Press, his running mate, J.D. Vance, claimed that Trump is not at all going to do the thing that is so clearly written out in Project 2025. The thing some of Trump's strongest allies are pushing for, and the thing J.D. Vance himself even advocated for in 2022.
Senator Graham said to me, I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban. If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's desk, would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the President of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
There are a lot of things you could say about that back and forth and his answer, but I think Senator Elizabeth Warren said it best.
American women are not stupid, and we are not going to trust the futures of our daughters and granddaughters to 2 men who have openly bragged about blocking access to abortion for women all across this country.
Women are not stupid. And joining me now is Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Senator Warren, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Good to see you.
I want to just start there and what J.D. Vance is now claiming. As you said, women aren't stupid. But I'm raising this because they're going to keep doing this, claiming that they are defenders of women's rights and abortion rights. And you are so good at many things, including succinctly giving people information. So how should people succinctly remind everyone out there what Trump and Vance actually stand for on abortion rights?
Okay, so let's start with, we all know what they're doing. They're just gaslighting us, right? And they think that we can't hear them when they talk to their radical base. So they go to the radical base. Trump did this just last week and bragged again about, I'm the guy that got rid of Roe versus Wade, right? He's the one that has now put us in this hole. And then he thinks he can turn around to the overwhelming majority of women and friends of women who think that what he has done is terrible. So here's the thing. I want to focus on where we are. You can almost laugh at what they've tried to do, except for the fact that 40% of all women in America now live in a state that effectively bans access to abortion. And that means that a woman, for example, can be in the middle of a miscarriage and she can go into an emergency room. She can be examined. The doctor can say, I know what it's going to take, the medical treatment you need, but you can't get it in this state because you're not near enough death. So please go out to the parking lot and hemorrhage for a while longer, hours, maybe overnight, and then come back in just before you're about to die. And we can perform the abortion that you need. We can give you the medication that you need. That's where 40% of the women in America live today. Those are our sisters, our cousins, our friends. And if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance take over the White House, make no mistake, it won't be 40%, it will be 100%. And the way they can do that, they don't even have to have a Republican Congress. They know this, and so does Project 2025 that has laid this out and said there's law right now on the books, the Comstock Act, which if you get a Donald Trump person over in the Department of Justice and they bring it in front of a Donald Trump judge, then it will be possible to effect an abortion ban all across this country. No medication abortion and no surgical abortions, because the actual instruments themselves cannot be sent through the mails, cannot be sent across state lines. So here's the deal. They've got their plan. They know what they intend to do. And Donald Trump knows that the only way he hangs on to his radical base is to follow through on that plan. But he thinks if he lies to us loud enough and long enough and sends J.D. Vance out there to lie to us, that somehow we're going to fall for it. And we're not going to notice that J.D. Vance sent a letter last year to the Department of Justice telling them to enforce that very law, the Comstock Act. So I got to say on this one, I go through all the nerdy details because they are important, because it matters what's happening to women across this country and the threats we face. But I also just want to say on this one, we will not be fooled here. People's lives are at stake. We are talking about access to abortion. We are talking about access to contraception. We are talking about access to IVF. And we do not believe as Democrats that the government should be making those decisions. We think that women should have the freedom to make those decisions with their doctors. And that's right there, the difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, between the Republicans and the Democrats.
We will not be fooled, I think, is a thing women should be saying out there across the country. Let me ask you, because about this debate about the debate, because when I talked to you the night that that Joe Biden decided he was no longer going to seek the nomination, you basically said that Trump is scared of a tough woman. A tough woman scares him. Do you think that's what's going on here?
Oh, I think Trump is really afraid of Kamala Harris, or as I like to think of it, the felon is really afraid of the prosecutor, and for damn good reason. She's smart, she's disciplined, and she's not afraid of a bully. So there it is. Donald Trump is scared, and I got to say, I think his whole team is scared, and that's why they're trying to find ways to muzzle him, to make this debate not happen if possible. Because Kamala Harris, she's going to wipe the floor with Donald Trump.
We do have to sneak in a very quick break. I have many more questions. Thank you for sticking with us. We'll be right back with Senator Elizabeth Warren. We are back with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren. I wanted to play that because it was really moving to watch. And I think one of the reasons people were so passionate and you got the response you did is because you've been a champion of progressive economic policy for so long, and people in that room knew that. But you were quite overcome. What was it like in that moment? What was going through your head?
I felt so deeply grateful to be there. You know me, and you've known me for a long time. I've always been a total policy nerd, but I never thought I would have the chance to be in the fight and to be able to fight for so many important things and to be there with so many other people who are in that same fight. It was just, it really was overwhelming. Just amazing.
Policy nerds are important. We need policy nerds. I love them too. I consider myself one. Now, on that point, I think you've been an advocate for, yeah, we love policy nerds. You've been an advocate for so many important economic policies. They don't always get the attention they deserve, and one of them is affordable housing. And Vice President Harris put forward an ambitious plan. I would consider it one for affordable housing, including a $25,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers, a $40 billion fund to encourage local governments to build more affordable housing. They don't always get the attention they need. We want to give it attention as policy nerds. Why is that such an important policy for the public out there?
So we have a housing shortage all over this country. Why are prices so high? It's Econ 101. We need more housing. And do you know who we need more housing for? Almost everybody. We need housing for first-time home buyers. We need housing for people who rent apartments. We need housing for seniors. We need housing for people with disabilities. We need housing for singles. We need housing for people who are growing their families. We need housing in urban areas and suburban areas and rural areas, and we don't have enough. And we've known this now for decades, Jen. We sit by and the problem just gets worse and worse and worse. And so what Vice President Harris is proposing is something I'm also pushing out there. I'm 100% on this, is we need the federal government to be a good partner in building more housing locally. Federal government should not come in and tell communities you need to build this and you need to build that, but to say instead, if you'll alter your policies so that you're building more housing for those first-time home buyers, for those renters, for those seniors and people with disabilities, we'll do the part the federal government can do, and that is be a partner to your community. We can put up the money so that you can have a new elementary school or a new sewage system or revitalize your downtown. Spend it in the ways you need in your community if you will bring down the price of building houses and getting more housing supply. Her goal is 3 million new housing units all across this country. And think about it this way. For middle-class families, being able to get on that train to buy that first house, that is the #1 way that families build wealth and wealth that lasts. It's the #1 retirement plan in America, and it is the #1 way to be able to pass wealth on and help stabilize the next generation. And more housing is a way to be able to help close the racial wealth gap in America. It's a way to build more economic security for everybody in this country. It is a fabulous proposal.
So like I said, there's lots to watch between the two campaigns. And it is understandable in presidential election years that all eyes are on that top-level contest between the two major parties and their presidential candidates. But in a presidential election year like this, with just, 2 months to go until the big day, may I also suggest that you don't sleep on what is happening in the states. Yes, watch the two major parties. Yes, watch their two candidates. Yes, watch the way the presidential campaigns fight each other and the nuances of how they compete. But watch what is happening in the states. Because sometimes, even in an election year, what is happening in the states just seems like it can't possibly actually be happening. For example, how is this for a local news lead this weekend in Michigan?
Things got off to an odd start at the Michigan Republican Party convention in Flint today. Former Michigan GOP chair Christina Caramo was escorted out of the event by police.
Yes, that is an odd start. Things did get off to an odd start. Even if this weren't the state Republican Party in one of the most important swing states in the country in a presidential election year, yes, that does sound like an odd start for the Michigan Republican Party state convention.
Former Michigan GOP chair Christina Caramo, who was ousted from leadership, made an appearance at the event but was removed by Flint police. New chair Pete Hoekstra was greeted by some boos as he took the stage.
We've had problems in this state party.
Officials say she was asked to take a seat but refused, and was also asked to leave but refused again. That prompted law enforcement to get involved, escorting her out of the building for, quote, causing a disruption and clogging up the floor.
Causing a disruption and clogging up the floor. Detroit News reporter Craig Mauger was able to capture this view of the former state Republican Party chair being escorted out of the state Republican Party convention by police. It was followed by some pushing and shoving, maybe even a little punching. It's hard to tell exactly what is going on there, but clearly something that is not politics is happening here as police are called in to remove from the state Republican Party convention the woman who claims she still is the chair of the Michigan Republican Party. She was elected in 2023. She was removed in January 2024 this year. She then refused to go. In February, a Michigan court ruled that she had to go. As of this summer, she was still trying to get courts to reinstate her as Michigan Party chairman. And as of this weekend, the cops were called in to get her out when she appeared on the floor of the state party convention. Did I mention that this is one of the most important states in the country for the presidential race, and we're 2 months out from the presidential election, right? The ostensible state chairman is almost booed off the stage as he tries to convene their state convention. And the person who claims she's still the real party chair is escorted out by police. I mean, it's been months now that in the Michigan State Republican Party, they've been calling the cops on each other and getting in fistfights at their official Republican Party events. We pay so much attention to how the two parties' presidential campaigns are doing, competing against each other in various swing state polls, I mean, it's worth noticing when things are absolutely bananas with one of the parties in those states. And it is not only happening in one state. I mean, not long after the Michigan Republican Party went to war with itself and ousted its chair, and she refused to go, and she took them to court, and nobody knew who was running the place. Not long after that, a version of the same thing also happened in the state of Florida. Right after Michigan threw out their state Republican Party chair, Florida threw out theirs, too, following news reports that he was being investigated by police for allegations of rape. Police also said they were investigating him for video voyeurism charges for allegedly illegally recording a sexual encounter without consent. The Florida Republican Party threw him out. Police later cleared him of charges in both of those investigations. But then right on the heels of that, the state of Arizona lost their state Republican chair, too. That same Republican Senate candidate who awkwardly appeared with Trump this weekend, Kari Lake, she released secretly recorded audio tapes of the Arizona State Republican chairman in which she said he was trying to bribe her to leave the Senate race. She also reportedly threatened to release more tapes of him, and so he quit as Arizona State Republican Party chairman. Then right on the heels of that, the National Republican Party lost its chair, too. Romney McDaniel pushed out or resigned, apparently in order to make room for Donald Trump's daughter-in-law. Her experience for the job included being a singer, in addition to being married to one of Trump's sons, the blonde one. So that seemed like a totally legit, non-controversial, meritocratic choice for the leadership of the National Republican Party, and so Romney McDaniel had to go. But all of that has all happened just this year. In 2024. It's only August. But, I mean, Michigan, Florida, Arizona, the National Republican Party, they all lost their top leadership under embarrassing, if not terrible, circumstances, all in a crucial election year. And now it's happened again. This time it has happened in Colorado.
We start tonight with some big news in Colorado politics. The state's Republican Party chairman is out. Dave Williams and other party leaders were voted out as leadership of the Colorado GOP today. But those party leaders have said they consider today's meeting and vote fake. The meeting started at noon and is still going. Right now, Republican Party members are voting on who will now lead the state party. 9 News reporter Lauren Scafidi has been there all day.
It's 2.5 months until Election Day, and Colorado Republican Party members are still fighting their own leader.
And to those who say, don't change a rider in the middle of a race, that's a valid argument, unless, of course, the rider is trying to kill the horse.
That is a valid argument unless the rider is trying to kill the horse. So that was this weekend, Saturday, as Colorado Republican Party officials met to vote out their state party chairman, who they said was destroying the party. Now, for his part, it's a little bit like what happened in Michigan. The Republican Party chair in Colorado is refusing to recognize the validity of the vote to remove him, because of course he is. He says the meeting this Saturday in Brighton, Colorado, where they voted to fire him, he says it was, quote, a sham and illegitimate and illegal. As of Sunday, the day after they voted to fire him, he at least still had custody of the state Republican Party letterhead on which to release his statement that said his firing was a sham, and so he's still in charge somehow. So that's something. Maybe possession is 9/10 of the law, right? Maybe you still are kind of the state Republican Party chairman if you still possess some 8.5 by 11 letterhead that has your name on it. I don't know. I mean, who knows? One person who says she is still the chair of the Republican Party in Michigan was escorted out of that party's state convention by cops this weekend while fists flew. Another person who says he's still the chair of the Republican Party in Colorado was voted out by the other Republicans, but he says their vote doesn't count and he has the letterhead to prove it, and he's still the real chair, and he'll convene his own meeting this upcoming weekend, and then everyone will see who's really in charge. Doesn't it seem like a great idea to put those folks and that party in charge of the whole country?
Robert Kennedy Jr., the Jeffrey Dahmer of the animal kingdom, has horrified his family almost as much as Jeffrey Dahmer horrified his family by endorsing the most horrifying Republican presidential nominee in history, the only president who was more of a criminal in the White House than Richard Nixon, who Robert Kennedy Jr.'s father tried to keep out of the presidency by running against him until Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, which instantly, and it seemed permanently, created a beatific glow around the name Robert Kennedy, a name which his son has now fully disgraced. Robert Kennedy Jr.'s younger sister, Kerry Kennedy, said, quote, "I'm outraged and disgusted by my brother's gaudy and obscene embrace of Donald Trump and his flagrant and inexplicable effort to desecrate and trample and set fire to my father's memory." Robert Kennedy Jr. told many lies in his speech announcing his endorsement of Donald Trump, including this one, quote, "The mainstream media networks maintain a near-perfect embargo on interviews with me," end quote. Over a year ago, on July 12th, 2023, I issued a public invitation to Robert Kennedy Jr. to appear on this program at the time of his choosing, and he never chose to do that. If he does show up, I'll make it easy on him by giving him the first question ahead of time. I'll give it to him right now. It's a new question that I didn't have until I read an article by Kurt Andersen published in The Atlantic this weekend, in which Kurt Andersen describes buying cocaine from his college classmate Bobby Kennedy when they were both freshmen at Harvard College in 1972. Because Donald Trump favors the death penalty for drug dealers, the death penalty for doing what Bobby Kennedy did, At the end of his article, titled RFK Jr. Was My Drug Dealer, Kurt Andersen suggests this question for Robert Kennedy Jr., quote, given that you sold cocaine in your youth, how do you feel about Trump's advocacy of a regime that might have resulted in your own execution at age 19? Of course, Donald Trump does not advocate the death penalty for violations of the Espionage Act or any of the other crimes he's been accused of and for which he is awaiting trial, which we will get to in a moment with Andrew Weissmann and Neil Katyal. There are only 71 days left in Donald Trump's political career, assuming he comes in second in the Electoral College for the second time in a row. And the news media is finally focusing on the problems caused by Donald Trump's tariffs.
Well, let's talk about Trump's record during his first term. He did impose rounds of tariffs, and it cost Americans nearly $80 billion in new taxes. Do you acknowledge that imposing more tariffs will ultimately cost consumers?
Well, what it really does is it penalizes importers from bringing goods outside the country into the country.
That answer was, of course, a lie, as is every word Donald Trump has ever said about tariffs. It took 8 years. It took 8 years to finally get the news media to focus on the lies Donald Trump and now J.D. Vance tell about tariffs. It has been a very lonely 8 years for me, having had to explain repeatedly on this program what most people already know, which is that tariffs are paid by the consumers in the country that imposes the tariff. China doesn't pay Trump tariffs. We pay Trump tariffs. That is the point of a tariff. The purpose of a tariff is to raise the price of that imported good so that Americans will not be able to buy as much of that imported good. So every penny of Trump's tariffs, every penny of them, has been paid by Americans in the form of higher prices. And all of the tariff money collected by the United States government has been paid out to farmers across Iowa and elsewhere in the country to make up for the massive losses they have suffered in grain sales to China, because China retaliated against the Trump tariffs by, among other things, not buying agricultural products from the United States of America. Many of those Iowa farmers who lost their grain sales and their income are still voting for Donald Trump because they're now the biggest welfare recipients in American history. They have received $28 billion in cash payments, just cash, here it is, directly to them for doing absolutely nothing. And no one in the Republican world is worried about the work ethic of those farmers who are collecting that no-strings-attached money directly from the federal treasury to make up for the farmers' loss of income from trade with China. Donald Trump's tariffs are sales taxes on you that are in effect used to make huge welfare payments to American farmers. And now Donald Trump wants to impose even more tariffs, which former Treasury Secretary and Harvard economics professor Lawrence Summers has called the worst economic proposal in U.S. history. Donald Trump has never once even come close to answering a reporter's question about tariffs, and J.D. Vance did not answer the question about tariffs put to him yesterday. They never answer questions. No matter how many questions you ask them, they do not answer. A lie is not an answer. I'm ready to heap praise on the reporter or debate moderator who asks Donald Trump the simple question, what is a tariff? Just those words, nothing else, because I think the world would find out that Donald Trump doesn't know what a tariff actually is. Reporters always prefer to show off the complexity of their questions, so we will probably never hear that simple question asked of Donald Trump. As he can feel the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, Donald Trump knows which side has the momentum in the campaign now. and what that could mean to his future as a criminal defendant. The stakes for Donald Trump personally in the presidential election could not be higher. The Electoral College will either hand him the White House or keep him on track to spend the rest of his life as defendant Trump. 78-year-old criminal and civil defendant Donald Trump will be able to crush the criminal proceedings against him if he wins the Electoral College. But if he doesn't, his life as a criminal defendant will proceed in a federal case in Washington, D.C., and he will be sentenced in a criminal case in New York City, where he has already been convicted. He will eventually go to trial in Georgia, facing criminal charges there, and Special Prosecutor Jack Smith has appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to put the criminal case against Donald Trump for violations of the Espionage Act and the illegal possession of classified documents back on track on its way to trial. In an appeal of a dismissal ruling by Donald Trump's favorite judge, Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who Donald Trump appointed to the federal court, Jack Smith insisted that it is indeed constitutional for the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel. Judge Cannon dismissed the case by declaring the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith unconstitutional. Jack Smith's brief to the Court of Appeals filed today says the Attorney General validly appointed the special counsel, who is also properly funded. In ruling otherwise, the district court deviated from binding Supreme Court precedent, misconstrued the statutes that authorized the special counsel's appointment, and took inadequate account of the long-standing history of Attorney General appointments of special counsel. Jack Smith's brief cites the appointment of a special counsel for the treason prosecution of Confederate General Jefferson Davis and John Surratt, the man who aided and abetted the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in 1865. Jack Smith did not ask the appeals court to remove Judge Cannon from the case, but the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals could decide to do so. If the 11th Circuit reverses Judge Cannon's decision, it would be the third time they have reversed major rulings by Judge Cannon, and we will discover if 3 strikes means Judge Cannon is out. Trump's criminal defense lawyers now have 30 days to respond to Jack Smith's brief. Written filings in the appeal will be complete by mid-October. Oral arguments in the case will probably be scheduled after the election, and by that time, if Kamala Harris wins the presidency 71 days from now, then Donald Trump will know that he will indeed spend the rest of his life as defendant Trump in trial courts and appeals courts.
And we begin tonight with the panic that seems to be setting in inside MAGA world, where Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz's polls, TV ratings, and momentum are causing what can only be described as anxiety, doubt, and nothing short of a freak out on the pro-Trump side. It is so grim over there. Senator Lindsey Graham spent part of his weekend interview with CNN's Jake Tapper arguing that joy itself isn't real. On Friday, Eric Bolling, who lost his job at Fox due to his rampant sexual harassment of his colleagues, making him a perfect Trump acolyte, then lost his gig at Tiny Newsmax for some reason I honestly don't care enough to research, had a full-on meltdown over the ratings of last week's Democratic convention, in which this network beat his old network.
We're losing. We're losing the race. We're losing the presidency. So no one's watching Newsmax. Fox is now getting beat by MSNBC. They're trying to say that the Democrats are the patriots, the party that's worried about the country. They're wearing camo hats with Kamala Harris's name on it. Camouflage, that's ours.
They're wearing camo hats. Yeah, okay, that's right. Yeah, the party of Trump, who disparaged U.S. service members and veterans as suckers and losers, owns camo. Yeah, buddy, okay. The Trump camp honestly just cannot seem to catch a break. In Michigan, authorities are investigating whether a local sheriff who hosted Trump for a quasi-rally violated the law against using state resources for political reasons. Even more troubling for Trump's ego, musicians continue to deny him their songs. The rock band Foo Fighters joined the long list of A-list music artists, telling Trump to stop using their music, with a spokesperson telling Billboard, quote, Foo Fighters were not asked permission, and if they were, they would not have granted it. adding that appropriate actions are being taken against the campaign and any royalties received as a result of this usage will be donated to the Harris-Walz campaign. Beyonce also sent a cease and desist to Donald Trump's campaign for its use of the song Freedom without permission on a social music video. And Trump will have to face the Isaac Hayes estate in court on September 3rd as their $3 million lawsuit over the Trump campaign's unauthorized use of the Hayes-written classic Hold On, I'm Coming goes to court for an emergency hearing. The hits just keep coming, even as the Trump campaign can't use any actual hits. See what I did there? MAGA is losing the culture war. Because guess what? Modern folks in the year of our Lord 2024 refuse to go back. Book banning school board candidates backed by Moms for Liberty and Ron DeSantis lost races in Florida. And in Oklahoma, some school districts are flat out rejecting the state superintendent's order that they place a Bible in every classroom and teach lessons out of it, or else face repercussions. The school superintendent in the Bixby School District, a Christian former Marine Corps artilleryman who is against the order, told the Associated Press, and I quote, "If there is no curricular standard that ties with that particular classroom, what would be the purpose of a Bible, if not for pure indoctrination?" It's a solid question. Meanwhile, Trump running mate J.D. Vance continues to struggle. Here he is trying to explain away his miserable, childless cat ladies diss of millions of American women on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Look, I regret certainly that a lot of people took it the wrong way, and I certainly regret that the DNC and Kamala Harris lied about it.
But do you regret what you said, Senator?
Look, Kristen, I'm going to say things from time to time that people would disagree with. I'm a real person. I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to say things sarcastically. I think that it's much more important for me to just be a normal human being who sometimes says things that people disagree with. I have a lot of regrets, Kristen, but making a joke 3 years ago is not in the top 10 of the list.
Yeah, that wasn't good. And speaking of white male nominees withering in front of black women, Trump suggested last night that he might weasel out of the ABC debate with VP Harris, hurling complaints over fake news, blah, blah, blah. It's boring. But this is how you know that things are really bad, when Trump and Vance seem to be ditching their anti-abortion Christian right allies, with Trump posting this lie on Dime Store Twitter, and I quote, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." Trump posted that on Friday, which in his brain was opposite day. You can also chalk it up to Trump being a gaslighter, a liar, and a con. But then you have to also have Vance spinning this yarn. You also have Vance spinning this yarn again on Meet the Press.
I've been talking to Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham just last week, who've made it very clear that if Donald Trump is elected, if you are elected, they will continue to press this point. Senator Graham said to me, "I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban." If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's desk, would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the President of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
Yeah, James David. See, the problem with that is that between Project 2025, which proposes renaming the Department of Health and Human Services the Department of Life, explicitly rejecting the notion that abortion is health care, and the existence of the Comstock Act, which Trump could use to ban all abortions nationwide without the need for congressional action, and Trump's previous bragging about terminating Roe v. Wade, no one believes y'all. Well, that is, except for the National Review, which posted this dejected, very sad article over the weekend accusing their godhead of abandoning his forced birth followers, prompting NFL kicker and evangelical proselytizer Harrison Butker to beseech J.D. Vance to pull a Mike Pence without the hanging part and drag Trump back onto Team Gilead. Trump and Vance have clearly seen the enemy. And it is not just former President Obama, whose crowd size and other size joke apparently broke his brain last week, as did Mrs. Obama's powerful speech, which has spawned an actual hit TikTok song. No, the real enemy is Kamala Harris, who with her running mate, Coach Walz, is launching a bus tour across Georgia on Wednesday, concluding with a Thursday rally around Savannah. Trump can't seem to figure out how to deal with Kamala Harris and the voters that she and Coach Walz are attracting to their upbeat campaign, particularly women. As polling expert Tom Bonnier pointed out over the weekend, the explosion of voter registrations by women is clearly being driven by legitimate fears of how much more miserable and exhausting and deadly a second time Trump ruled America could get, particularly as compared to the prospect of an America fueled by freedom and joy. And joining me now is Tom Bonnier, political strategist and senior advisor for Target Smart. Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki and former press secretary in the Biden White House, and MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle. Thank you all for being here. Tom, you have been invoked, and so I'm going to start with you. I would normally do ladies first, but I'm going to start with you, Tom. You tweeted about and prompted us to call you. You tweet, we call you. And about this explosion of women registering to vote and the resulting gender gap. Can you please explain?
I'd be happy to. This really caught me by surprise because we're always looking at the registration trends. I know we're all obsessed with polling. I am too. But we know that polling doesn't tell the whole story. The more important data is that individual level data that's showing us the actions people are taking. So the question that we asked of the data was, could we see something that happened after July 21st with the candidate change? And what I saw was honestly shocking. We saw gender gaps in new registration data across the country, in every state that we've looked at that has updated their file already, which is many, that were exceeding the post-Dobbs gender gaps that we saw. And we know those were bigger than any that had been seen before. And so we're talking about battleground states like Michigan and North Carolina, where it's not just little differences. It's women registering at a significantly higher rate than they were prior to that or that they were 4 years ago at the same period of time, especially younger women and women of color.
And Tom, just to be clear, I mean, women tend to vote at higher rates than men. I'm right about that, correct? In general, right? And across sort of racial dynamics. So are these polling differences, are they taking into account race and gender? Because we know that black women are overwhelmingly Democrats. So if 100 black women register to vote, 95 of them are going to vote Democratic. For white women, it's much more, well, lately it's been like 47% Democratic and 52 the other way, 53 the other way. Are the dynamics of race kind of in play here in terms of these voter registrations, or can we even tell?
Well, yeah, it's an important additional point to this. In a lot of these states, they have partisan registration. And so what we're seeing is that it's not just more women registering, it's more Democratic women. In states that don't have partisan registration, our teams have built partisan models. In the state of Michigan, it's plus 20 Democratic in terms of these people who are registering to vote or have registered to vote since the vice president ascended to the top of the ticket. You mentioned polling. That's a big concern here. Every pollster has to come up with a likely voter model to predict who's going to vote. Are these women included in these likely voter models? At this point, the likely answer is no.
See that, and Jen, I want to go to you on that because that's the thing is that people who are getting obsessed with these polls, even look, my kids are texting me about polls at this point. Everyone is very much fixated on them, but it's hard to really suss out how accurate they are. I'll just read you a couple. This is New York Times Siena, the notorious. We read it a lot, although I have deep doubts about it. Women, Trump 39, women, Harris 56. Men, it's the other way around. Trump 55, 40. You look at stuff like that, or the battleground poll, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, same gender gap. Women, women, Trump 40, women, Harris 55, 56, 38 the other way when it comes to men. But it's very hard to look at those and not take into account which women and which men are going to vote.
That's true. I mean, every polling's imperfect. Every poll is a bet on who the electorate is going to be, right? And it doesn't mean it's betting correctly on who the electorate is going to be. And what we've seen, this is why when you compare, when there are polls or analysis that's comparing 2020 voters to who they are and who they're with to now, is missing 2022 when the Dobbs decision came out, and that completely enraged women across the country. So what you hear when you talk, and I know you talk to a lot of these people too, Joy, people who are running organizations like Emily's List or organizations that are focused on abortion rights and reaching these women, what they tell you is that these women are undercounted. And that we see that in special elections. We've seen that in the midterm elections, because this is an issue where it's hard for people to bet on what percentage of the electorate is going to turn out who otherwise wouldn't have.